Please give your attention to Rabbi Beyda. I'm sure it's going to be engaging. Thank you for being here, Rabbi.
Thank you everyone. I want to begin by thanking Beth Torah for putting together what I consider to be a really important conference. Not only the topic, but also the idea of taking a week and taking a variety of different speakers from around the community and presenting them to the public at large. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the invite. So thank you, Beth Torah, thank you, committee, thank you, sponsors, and thank you, Jeffrey, especially for being really on top of everything and running an excellent program. I also want to say thank you to everyone for coming out. I understand how difficult it is. This has been one whirlwind of a week for me, and I'm sure that I am not alone in this. It is a challenging time and maybe part of our topic as well. And anyone that made the effort to be here, I really do appreciate it, so thank you very much. I begin with a question. The question is the title of the talk, and that is Judaism relevant in the age of smartphones? And before I even take on the question, I think it's really important that we appreciate that it is a question. And actually, Jeffrey, when you reached out to me about the conference had a question or somewhere, and I'm told that had some backstory to it as well that it no longer does. But I want to say that it's really important that we recognize not only the validity of questions, but the need to question. And I think it's really, really important. Sometimes Judaism, and maybe other religions, but Judaism, the ones I know a lot more about, is defined as a faith, and faith is often, especially because it comes from it's used in a Christian terminology as no questions, and Judaism is really quite the opposite. Heschel said it really very, very well. He said that religion is the answer to the ultimate questions, and he ascribed the problems that religion faced by people stopped having the questions, so the answers became a lot less relevant. And therefore, I think it's really important, step one, if we do nothing else, that we accept the validity of questions and that we understand that religion is intended to deal with the questions that human beings have and that struggle with. And when you say a question, it's not necessarily, in fact, it's not an informational question. These are questions about morals, about ethics, about what is good, what is right, and those are necessarily questions that are deep, that are difficult, that a person struggles with. And if we don't struggle with it, then the answers, the good answers, are really not that meaningful. They're really not that relevant. So I think that's an important place to start. And therefore, I add to my Chazak Baruch on the concept that you have here. So I go back to our question. The question is Judaism relevant in the age of smartphones? And in order to answer that question, I think we have to define terms. And there's three terms that are in this question. And I'll answer them in this order. The age of smartphones, what does that mean? Judaism, what does that mean? And relevance, what does that mean? So let's start with the age of smartphones. I think we know that today, this item, this device, that I would be surprised if there's anyone here that either is not connected to and doesn't check while you're down here. I'm pretty amazed you guys get reception down here. We don't, in Bnei, it's hot, you're in the basement, nothing works. But you guys, I saw people on the phone before. So, okay, in any event, it doesn't matter. You don't even need the connectivity. People are still checking. And we live in a time that is one that is defined by the rapid technological advances that we have, the intense level of connectivity that we have with one another, and how the world has really shrunk and sped up at the same time. And I think that those two features are features of the smartphone age. I don't think they're limited purely to the smartphone. Obviously, they're very much connected to the internet, which powers the smartphone. But there are many, many other factors that make things work, including the ability to travel from one place to another, and a whole host of many, many other issues. But when we say the age of smartphones, we mean the 21st century, the century that we live in. That is, again, a quick time and a connected time. When we talk about Judaism, what do we mean? And there's a wonderful joke that is used about Judaism that basically says you can have Judaism to mean whatever you want it to mean. So for me, I'm explaining Judaism as the Jewish tradition as sourced by the Torah and the subsequent rabbinic development of its understanding. And that includes the customs and lifestyles that we have that are considered traditional Judaism. And when I talk about Judaism tonight, I'm talking on a very broad stroke, but I think that's a healthy way to look at it, as I will get to in the conclusion. And finally, relevance. What does relevance mean? What are we talking about if we're asking a question, is Judaism relevant? Does it have relevance for us in this age of smartphones in the 21st century? And I think very simply, it means, does it address the issues of the day? Does it speak to the problems that we have? Does it somehow relate to the challenges that we face living in the age that we live in? So to answer that, I'd like to just take a scan of what I think are some of the major issues, and by no means an exhaustive list, but I hope you'll think that this is actually a fairly good list of what you'll find if you open up the New York Times and you read it for 30 days straight. I think you're going to find many of these issues crossing the pages of the New York Times, and I don't use the New York Times as necessarily the best newspaper in the world. It's just one example. If you want to pick the Wall Street Journal or something else, go ahead. Income equality and poverty, big issue. The responsibilities that we have to educate our children, major issue going on, certainly in the United States of America. How to debate one another with civility. Anyone seen anything that's going on with the election this year? And it's not just the election this year. Congress has been gridlocked for a while, and go look at what's happened in Europe over the last couple of months and even years. Big issue. How do we wage war ethically? What should peace look like, and how do we arrive at it? What are our responsibilities to the environment? How do we balance the blessings of technological advances along with the challenges that they create? These are major issues that we face, and they're not the only ones. But I'm proud to tell you that Judaism, as we defined it, provides important perspective on each and every one of these issues. I want to tell you a story about a teacher that I had. He passed away about a year or two ago. And this teacher of mine was a tremendous scholar, and a lot of the work that he did on interfaith dialogue. And this man very quietly, very secretly got to be able to have tremendous access to the Vatican and some of the things that we hear about and we don't know what they have or not. And he was telling me a story once about a conversation that he had with a very, very high up person at the Vatican. And the story goes more or less like this. He says, sir, I want to tell you, you Jews are pretty interesting. He says, because whereas when you have an issue that you have to deal with, you have libraries and traditions to be able to look at and research, and I have my Bible and my conscience, and that's about it. And that's from a Catholic priest. And I think there's some truth to that. I think any issue that you're going to look at, you're going to find verses in the Torah that relate to it, but you're also going to find somewhere in the Gemara, in the Midrash, in the many, many works that various different rabbis and other Jewish thinkers have thought about over the centuries, we have something to say about just about everything. And usually, it's not just one thing. Usually, it's a variety of different views, and that variety of different views reflects the variety of different experiences Jews have had over the course of centuries, and that's something that's really important as well. So, I believe that it is almost obvious that Judaism is very relevant in our times, because Judaism and the tradition that we're given speaks to each and every issue that we have in one way or another. And I believe that most of us believe this, and that we understand this. And I think that we understand that this is something that not only is true, that it is true that Judaism speaks to these issues, but I think we believe that it's valuable as well. Because I think it's a core Jewish belief that we believe that Judaism will make the world a better place. In fact, we think that's what it's intended to do. I'm going to use a loaded term, which is tikkun olam. Tikkun olam is something that is accepted by pretty much all Jews, whatever that term means. And of course, we have and this goes way back, all the way to Va'etchanan, where Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, and Moshe tells the people, listen, keep the Torah, keep the mitzvot, and when you keep the Torah and the mitzvot, something very interesting is going to happen. The non-Jews are going to take notice. And when the non-Jews are going to take notice, they're going to say, wow, the Torah is a pretty amazing thing. And they're going to see that in some way, shape, or form as a proof of God. And that is supposed to impact the way that they live their lives. Now, whether or not that actually happens or not, or always happens or sometimes happens, the fact that the Torah says that tells you that the Torah values that incredibly. The Torah wants to be world-changing. The Torah wants Judaism to be something that makes the world a better place. I'm going to give you a few examples of where the Torah has actually done this. The first one is one that Rabbi Sachs speaks about all the time, is the United States of America. We know the United States of America is founded upon biblical principles. And one of the ways that we see this is in the statement of, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And Rabbi Sachs asked the question very well. He says, who holds those truths to be self-evident? Most of history did not hold those truths to be self-evident. Most people believe that certain people were born to be ruled and other people were born to be rulers. Most people did not believe that all human beings are created equal in any way, shape, or form. Where did they get this from? They got this from the Bible. And certainly the founding fathers were incredibly religious and believed incredibly in the values that the Torah and I dare say Judaism put out there. But I'm going to give you a more recent example. There's a relatively new form of psychology known as positive psychology. The father of modern positive psychology is a Jewish guy, by the way, named Martin Seligman. I don't think he's religious in any way, shape, or form. But positive psychology, just by the title, tells you is a very optimistic-looking form of psychology, very different than Freudian psychology. Freudian psychology basically starts with the premise of we're all messed up. Our parents messed up, their parents messed up, the world messed up, and Freud, it's well known, is based on Greek thinking. And Greek thinking is a certain type of thinking. Greek literature is known for its tragedy. The Greeks were known to glorify suicide. The Greeks had a very bleak outlook. Their concepts of fate and destiny are, you can't change anything. It is what it is. We know from the beginning that it's already terrible. Go pay the psychologist for that. You're going to end up not being so happy. But Seligman came along and said a very different approach. And he said, look, most people are healthy. And what the health is not necessarily the absence of an illness. And not everyone has an illness. And this is something that's out there. And there's actually a number of people that are out there today trying to reverse the way people do therapy, not looking at it starting from sick, but actually looking at it starting from healthy. And many of them use a biblical model because they understand that the Freudian model is built on Greek thinking, which is very depressing. And they're looking for other models, and they found that the Bible to be one that is very optimistic. So I'm not sure if what I've said up until now is something that's necessarily new or creative to anyone, but I think the question that really bothers us and probably underlies our title here is, very nice, Rabbi. I believe in the ideas of Judaism. I believe the ideas in Judaism are world-changing. I believe the Torah has what to say to the world. Very good. So what? Why do I have to practice as a Jew in order to get to these points? Why do I have to keep halakha, per se, in order to make Judaism relevant in the 21st century? And I think when we look at it, and obviously this is a huge topic in and of itself, halakha boils down in this sense to two very important basic principles. Number one is that the halakha wants to create and maintain a nation of purpose-driven individuals. The Torah wants and needs a group of people that wake up every morning and say, I am going about my life with a purpose. I have a mission. I am part of something big. And the way to do that is by saying not just simply, oh, there's an idea, but rather by giving nitty-gritty details that you have to do each and every day to tell me how to do right, how to do left, how to bless my children, how to pray to God, how to tie my shoes, and so on. And it's not necessarily that each and every one of those necessarily has to speak to the grand value, but there is a value in just simply living in a purpose-driven way. And the halakha really, really gets that across. And the second thing that the halakha wants to do is to separate us from the others, and separation not in a walled-off sense, but rather separate us in terms of elevation. The concept of Kiddusha in the Torah is not separate, not touching. It's separate and above, raised up. And therefore, the metaphor that the Torah uses is that we're supposed to be a beacon for others. And the way that we can become a beacon for others is by keeping the Torah and keeping the mitzvot. And again, that goes back to the very, very beginning when Moshe Rabbeinu says, the people are going to see you. The non-Jews are going to see you. They're going to see how you keep the laws. The laws are going to be just. The laws are going to be right. And the people are going to watch you keep the laws. And they're going to say, wow, that's God. That's fantastic. That's amazing. So if we believe that that's actually the case, the question is not whether or not Judaism is relevant, but actually whether or not we want to be relevant. Because the relevance is clearly there. Judaism has tremendous things to offer to the world, and therefore Judaism needs Jews in order to offer those things. And Jewish living needs to be something. It needs to be there. And therefore the halakha comes in and it creates a certain type of Jewish living. Now I know what many of you must be thinking. Gee, they really went very heavy on this, and there's a lot of times that I have to do a lot of things that really just doesn't speak to me on a day-to-day basis on this. And I'd like to relate something that does not directly relate to this, but I think gives a certain idea of a perspective that I think we're supposed to have. A well-known Jewish Musar book called Mesilat Yesharim. It's by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, a Kabbalistic Italian rabbi. A very interesting book on a number of levels. One of the most interesting aspects of it is it's an incredible organization. It's really, of the Jewish library, Harambam is probably the most categorical and organized, but maybe second, ahead of Shulchan Aruch for sure, might be Mesilat Yesharim. If you want to take out if you want to have an exercise in drawing flowcharts and categories, take out Mesilat Yesharim and you can do it. It really fits beautifully. And he has a question that is not our question. He says, you know, how do we relate to God when bad things are happening to us? And he says humans can tell themselves one of two things. And he says the first thing is easy. Most people do it. Everyone does it, really, is what he's saying. And the second is a little bit harder. Again, he's not telling you this is the answer. He's telling you this is what we need the perspective we need to have to be able to handle difficult situations that we have in life. The first answer, he says, is it's all good. Right? Whatever came my way is blessing, it's beracha. I have cancer, it's for the good. I lost my business, it's for the good. I didn't get a job, don't worry, it's going to be fantastic. Whatever it may be, right? It's for the good. I just don't see it. And that's something that he says is easy for people to do. And the truth is, if you look around and you find that, first of all, this is something that young children are able to digest and to be able to handle. And also people, I don't want to denigrate anybody, but some simple-minded people, they latch onto this and it works. And the Ramchal said he's not saying this is a terrible approach because it seems like he thinks it works for some people. But then he moves on to the second. And he says that one is nice, but I think and he says it this way, he says for Talmidei Chachamim and people that understand depth, he says we need to be able to have the perspective that we're part of something bigger. And that when we're part of something bigger, then we don't always get exactly what we want, because what may be best for me may not be best for the whole. And what's really underlying what his point is that a person needs to have a greater sense of perspective of the way things work. And I think what underlies this is it says the following thing. He says, I, insignificant me, can play a role. Meaning, in this perspective, a person understands that he's not ultra-significant. It's not all about him. The first person who says, oh, it's all for the good, thinks that God is running the whole world in order that he could get good and it's all going to be good for him. The second person says, listen, it may not be good for me personally, but I know that there must be some picture, something that makes it make sense. And I think that the idea here, again, is to be able to take that step back and see the big picture. Because a lot of times we're going to see a particular halacha, practice, custom, or something along those lines that rub us the wrong way. And I don't think that time, as it always has. And the question is, so is it? Or how do we make it happen? And I think that there's two basic components that we need to have. The first is the wisdom to be able to apply the tradition. One of the great parts of Judaism is that it's supposed to fit, and it's supposed to provide answers to each and every age. But it's not an answer book. It's not something that you say, well, I have a question, oh, let me turn to page 62, oh, that's where it is. Right? Rather, what must we do? We must be able to take the time to understand what our tradition has to say. Often our tradition has to say a number of different things, and to be able to apply it with wisdom to what we have. And I think that that's something that is severely lacking in our generation because we look for quick answers. It's been my experience that a lot of people that represent Judaism are too quick to provide answers. They're too quick to say, I read a line in the Gemara, and so there it is, so you're wrong, I'm right, and so be it. And it's just, that's a very immature way to look at what our Jewish tradition is about. Because as someone once told me, what's represented many times as Judaism is right between these two lines, but what is traditional Judaism is somewhere over here. And our ability to appreciate that and to figure out how we're supposed to use that and to be able to apply it to our time requires wisdom, but it can be done. And of course that means that people need to study the Torah with that end in mind. And I think that's lacking as well. I think that people study the Torah and study Judaism and are not studying it as the source for the answer to these questions. They're not asking this question. And when they don't do that, so we're not going to get there. So I think one of the things that we need to be doing, and we need to train our students and our rabbis to be able to do, and rabbis, I use that term loosely because I know I'm going to get myself in trouble when saying this. I don't mean necessarily someone that sits in front of the shul. I mean people that have scholarship and people that teach. And that does not necessarily have to be a certain type of male figure. I'm not saying women rabbis, so don't, you can keep it on the tape. I'm not saying that. But there are certainly, and there have been for a long time, women that serve the role of rabbis, and that should be recognized and respected, and certainly they can contribute to this as they have. So I think that's an important thing to recognize as well. So I'm getting closer towards where I want to end, and the second thing that I think that we need, and this is much harder than the first, even though the first is very hard, is the patience for development. I think as we started, that one of the challenges of the age of smartphones is we assume we can get any answer we want as quickly as possible. It's just Google it, and that's it. And for information, that works. But for real problems, it doesn't. And sometimes, not sometimes, I'm going to say virtually all the time, if not all the time. I don't like to speak in absolutes. Any real problem requires the perspective of time to solve it. And so often, we're pained by a problem that we just we've got to answer it now. If we don't have an answer for it now, if I don't see an answer for it now, it's no good. There's something wrong. And it just doesn't work that way. And I think that having the patience to be able to say, gee, this religion has been working for several thousand years. And even though I see a challenge today and I don't see an answer imminent, I'm still going to work towards it. I'm still going to take a step towards it. I'm still going to have a certain confidence that we're going to get there because we always have. In terms of keeping that perspective, I think it's important that we not take a certain approach that sometimes I find people do, which is the world is not falling down around us. I think if you look at the world that we live in, and I think if you look at the Jewish world that we live in, it certainly has problems, but we're doing okay. And sometimes if you try and solve problems in crisis mode when we're not in a crisis, then you're not going to solve the problems correctly because you're going to act with a certain panic, you're going to act with a certain hysteria, you're going to act with a certain impatience that goes against what we're talking about here. So, to be sure, there are challenges, but we have to address them with the thoughtfulness that serious matters deserve. I want to end with two thoughts, and then there'll be time for questions in the next speaker. It's really important, and this is something that I try to communicate with our students in school. We have been handed an incredible heirloom that's called the Jewish tradition. The Mesorah, that's the way the rabbis talk about it. And it's been literally handed to us. And what does it mean that it's been handed to us? Well, think about yourself and think about what it took to get you here. To get you here, you pretty much had to have two parents that were pretty committed to you being here. Meaning they lived some kind of Jewish lifestyle, because if they didn't, then guess what? You wouldn't be in the basement of Beth Torah on a Wednesday night for a class, more or less. Right? So you had two parents that did that. But guess what? That means they probably had two parents that did that, each. And they probably had two parents that did that, each. Go back 40 generations, which is not a crazy number. Go back 40 generations. How many people made that decision? It's about 1.5 million. Right? And this, by the way, when I talk about this to my high school classes, it really opens their eyes. 1.5 million blood people, meaning your parents and grandparents, they made conscious decisions to get you here and to hand you this tradition. This tradition that can answer many of our world's problems. Are you just going to say, oh, well, this doesn't make sense to me, at 17 years old, or at 40, or at 70? Think about it. We've been handed one of the most valuable things in the history of the world, and I, that's an extreme statement, but I believe it's one that's been proven to be true. And when you have something that valuable, you have to deal with it in a serious manner. And unfortunately, as I'll go back to Mesilat Yesharim, a lot of times people that represent what is Jewish tradition don't necessarily do this in the fullest way. Okay, but you know what? Judaism's so great that it's been able to withstand that too over many years. And we're going to be okay. So I ask to not get bogged down by the times where we say, gee, people don't seem to be getting this. Because Judaism has a fantastic and amazing way of working even when you don't realize that it's working. And it's been doing that for centuries, millennia actually. My wife shared with me a video today. Thank you for coming. She shared with me a video today. It might have been yesterday, and I just didn't get to it till today. It's been that kind of year so far. But about a teacher who hands out an assignment to his students. And he says, he gives them a sheet of paper, and he puts it, as the teacher normally does, on the desk face down. And he says, okay, turn it over. And they look, and they don't see much there. And they see a little dot on the page, a little black dot in the center of the page. And he says to them, okay, I need you to write about what you see on the page. And he gives them 15 minutes, and they sit and they write. And this one says it's a dot, it's in the center, it's black. Everyone writes what they write. And he lets them share. He says, how many of you wrote, I have a white sheet of paper? None of them. None of them. Because we're so preoccupied with the little dot that we miss the big picture. And we miss the big perspective. We have the greatest thing in history. And it hasn't lost an ounce of relevance since the day it was given. And in fact, it's as much needed today as the day that it was given. And the question is not whether or not it is relevant. The question is, do we want to be relevant, and do we want to do the necessary things which make it relevant and that continue it so that we can continue the wonderful tradition that we've received.